welcome to Let's Get Spooky, Talking Goth Comics. In this panel, we'll be talking about all things spooky. In particular, we'll be highlighting work by creators that could generally be considered goth or occult, from scary stories to spooky romps, creepy comics to suspenseful yarns, humorous tales to divination fun, and everywhere in between. I'm Yarmir Stoll. I'm just the co-organizer for LGBTQIA+ comics panels at CXC. And I'll be handing it off to our spooky moderator in just a second. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, the Departments of Illustration and Comics and Narrative Practice at the Columbus College of Art and Design. Y'all should go check out their website, see the fantastic things they're doing. But for now, I'm going to hand it off to Blue Delliquanti.
Hi, everyone. My name is Blue Delliquanti. I'll be your moderator today. I will be asking questions of 4 really talented cartoonists. I'll give everyone a quick opportunity to introduce themselves, tell us a bit about themselves. Let's start with Kat.
Hi, my name is Kat. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm a comic artist and cartoonist and illustrator of all trades, based in Austin, Texas. And I do a lot of comics and zines about Latinx culture and just like self-identity for middle grade and YA readers.
Awesome, thank you. I should say my pronouns are they. Let's go to Isabella next.
Hi, I'm Isabella. She, her, or they, them pronouns. They both work and I don't have a preference. I'm a cartoonist and illustrator. I'm from Maine. I usually live in Chicago, and sometimes I do comics that are sex education, and sometimes I do short narrative comics about my feelings. Yeah.
Thanks, Isabella. Jessi, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Jessi Zabarsky. I'm a cartoonist and illustrator living in Chicago currently. And I mainly make fantasy, magic, folktale comics, just things about feelings and being out in the woods and having an adventure. Oh, and I'm she, her.
Thank you. And Rad, now we have Dylan.
Hi, I'm Dylan Edwards. I do a lot of different comics of different sorts, which I have here, including like nonfiction stuff about queer and trans identity, and then contemporary fiction or sci-fi fantasy. But everything always has like a queer theme to it. And I also make weird little monsters called Feeping Creatures that we will see more of later in the program. And my pronouns are he, him.
Excellent. Okay, let me go through my questions here. The first one I have is for Isabella. One of the first works of yours that I experienced when I was getting ready for this panel was Long Black Veil, which is interesting in that it incorporates music into the comic format and establishes a very classic Gothic tone. Can you tell us more about this project?
Yeah, absolutely. So Long Black Veil is a folk song. So my grandmother, one of the things that we connected on quite deeply was folk music. She would always, like, my favorite part at Christmas was when she'd take out the acoustic guitar and do a murder ballad. I don't know if y'all are familiar with murder ballads, but they're like these folk songs that always center on someone dying, like usually someone stabs his fiance or gets hung at the gallows or something. And Long Black Veil was one she would do all the time. And the basic premise of the song is that the narrator, who's usually a man, the song wasn't written by, but was made famous by Johnny Cash, is accused of a murder that he didn't commit. And he ends up hanging for it because instead of giving an alibi, he chooses not to because he was having an affair with a married woman. So I always thought it was kind of funny that my grandmother was singing this song because she's a woman and I'm queer. So I had like a private little chuckle over that. And I ended up in this comic, which I have here, using all the lyrics to the song, and then I made the narrator a woman. So she was having a queer affair, which is why she ended up not giving an alibi. And I really liked how you could just change the whole plot of it with the drawings without changing the words at all. And then the look of it, I'm from New England, and I think about like the Salem witch trials a lot. So that was the setting I gave, was it was all in this New England like witch trial type town, which is, that comes to play later, but I'm not going to give it away.
I think I pulled an image from that. Is there a chance we can get that pulled up? Who did you collaborate with on the music part of that comic?
Jenny Owen Youngs, who is one of my favorite musicians, and I had the great fortune of actually meeting her. And a different work, I was actually working with her wife and ended up meeting her, her ex-wife now, but her wife at the time. So I thought Jenny would be a wonderful fit. And I liked the idea of having a cover of it that was sung by a woman that was specifically for the comic to match with the comic. So my favorite way to read this comic actually is that we made a little video on YouTube where the panels are timed to Jenny's cover.
Awesome. Kat, one of the first pieces I saw from you was an anthology piece that you did called 100 Yokai Stories, which explores the Japanese ghost story tradition. What can you tell us about it?
So that comic, it's pretty old, but it's one of my favorite ones I've done. It was made for a friend. So I had two friends in college who got together and decided to make an anthology called Strange Paradise, which was essentially a love letter to Japanese horror films. And my favorite film at that time was, I think it's called Yokai Tales, 100 Yokai Stories. And if you don't know, yokai is basically like a Japanese spirit or like supernatural being. And for me, so like basically the movie is about a small village in Japan, and some hotshot like rich guy comes into town and basically wants to convert a shrine into a brothel, disrespecting everything from that village, their like ceremony, and they force the villagers to have a unique ceremony called I forget what the name was, but it's like they tell yokai stories while lighting up candles, and at the end of the ceremony you're supposed to have a purification ceremony so that you can kind of ward off any evil spirits. But of course he was a jerk and so decided not to do it, and thus angering the yokai who come into town, terrorize these like hotshot guys and their crew, and then scare them out of town. And for me, like I love like stories about like telling folklore to like family members and stuff, because back when I was growing up in Latin America, we have kind of like a tradition to tell each other like village stories about like family encounters with ghosts and like local folklore creatures and stuff. And for me, that whenever I am in a situation where I'm listening to ghost stories, it's like home for me. Like, I feel like I'm at home, and so I'm always drawn to these stories, like the yokai one. And I highly recommend watching the movie. It's like a 1960s like cheesy like practical effects. Yeah, I love it, but it was a really fun project.
That's awesome. That's cool that it gives you like a familiar feeling of something that you grew up with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dylan, I feel like I was the most familiar with your work, or I know you the best before this panel. And so I was very interested to see how your work would factor into this panel. You invited me to read your story, Old Ghosts, which is a story where you gave your characters a chance to visit an old house in Britain, I believe, with a lot of history. And they all experiences the house's reputation. It's like its sordid past and its resident ghosts in different ways. Can you talk about how you approached that creative challenge of designing a haunted house as a setting?
Yes, I can. So for that particular story, because some of the characters believe in ghosts and some of the characters don't believe in ghosts, the house design needed to be plausible to fall in either direction. So it had to be like the kind of house you're like, okay, this is kind of creepy, but also it could just be a house. And so there are a few different ways of approaching that kind of a concept. And the other thing I wanted to do is like, our stereotype of a haunted house is a Victorian mansion. So I'm always interested in exploring haunted house designs that aren't necessarily leaning on that imagery. So this particular house is a Tudor era mansion. So it would have been constructed in probably the 16th century. So for that, the house specifically is, or the story takes place in Shrewsbury in England, and I had been there when I lived in England, and so a lot of the images like the one you just showed are from my own photos of walking around Shrewsbury, and just kind of like, here are a bunch of, you know, cool architecture things. And Shrewsbury is supposed to be like the most haunted city in England. And of course, there are 5 other cities in England that are like, well, we're the most haunted city in England. But that was kind of part of what germinated the idea of, you know, the city itself has a claim to a lot of ghost stories. It has all of these very old buildings, and, you know, weird things happen in these buildings. So as far as like how to actually design it in a way that gave the reader a chance to experience that kind of uncertain level of like, is it haunted or not haunted? One of the things I did was to pull the images I was working from several different houses. So the house itself that they're walking around through is not a single house that actually exists. It's several different houses kind of mashed together, which means there's no point at which you feel like you understand how the rooms join up to each other. So anywhere you are in the house, you're slightly disoriented. And I actually, this reminded me of a thing that I wanted to read very quickly because I think it's very relevant to this panel, and goes into like haunted house thinking. But this is from a real house from the 18th century, which was maintained by Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was a surgeon. And he was his thing was bloodletting. Like, he liked to, his cure for everything was like, bloodletting. You have too much blood. That's why you have a headache, is too much blood. That's why you have, you know, cancer, too much blood. So he would bloodlet all of his patients. And then the description of his house is, at the height of the yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia, his front lawn had so much congealed spilled blood that it stank and buzzed with flies.
Gross.
This is real. This is a real place that existed. And you're like, if your doctor's house has blood front lawn, maybe don't go in that house at all. Like, that is, you know, like
that's like the house that blood built.
Right? Like, so your haunted house design could either go with, and the front lawn is made of blood, or, you know, it could go with something that's a little bit more like, this is a little weird, but I could go ahead and walk in there. But you think about that as being a real thing that actually happened in real life, of someone dumping a bunch of blood on their front lawn, and that being a thing of like, well, I don't feel well, so I'll go to the doctor whose front lawn is covered in blood. So when you're thinking about what kind of ghost stories would be attached to a house that is that old, there is a lot of history you can pull from that is just like, and I mix a few stories, maybe not that specific one, but other stories that I kind of pulled from Shrewsbury ghost stories of like, here are some horrible things that happened in this house. And you're like, did that really happen? And it turns out probably it did really happen in some regard, because people were dumping buckets of blood on their front lawns at that time. So literally they were doing anything. Like, it didn't.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing too, is like, especially when you're talking about Europe, it's, you know, houses that have been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Like, statistically, most things have happened in those kinds of houses.
Exactly.
Like, it's a totally different frame of reference from lots of like American haunted houses, for instance.
Right. It's like, one person died here. Oh, only one person. Jeez. You know, try a little harder. So.
Let's move to Jessi, because I also know your work fairly well, but I had not read before this. I had not read your comic Voracious, which is a very interesting and I think thematically appropriate for this panel comic. It draws from classic fairy tales in its structure and its characters, but it also leans hard into the dark themes and Gothic stylization that comes from classic fairy tales as well. Can you talk more about that project?
So this was something that had been kicking around in the back of my head for years, because I just, you know, let things percolate for a long time. But I finally made it, I think, shortly after the 2016 election. So that's where the darkness and the murder comes from. um, but I've always really loved the kind of texture and structure and weird but consistent rules of folk tales, and was lucky enough to have access to a lot of different cultures, folk tales and fairy tales when I was young, and have always been interested in dipping my toe into that myself. And so this one was my second foray into that, and like I said, was kicked off by some bad times, and ended up being a story of a fox mom doing some light cannibalism.
Do you have any folk tales that you would consider your favorites or that you think about frequently?
My top favorite is, I'm stalling because I blanked on the name. It's like,
what is it? What's it about? Like, where's it from?
There it is, Tatterhood.
I don't know that one.
Okay, so Tatterhood is the name of a girl. Something that's popped up in other folk tales is like, her mom was barren, wanted children, and so went to a witch, which said, take these seeds, plant them under your bed. 2 flowers will grow. One is a nice flower, one is a weird flower. Don't eat the weird flower. And the mom ate both flowers because the first one tasted so good. And her first daughter was born, and she was very beautiful and very, classic fairy tale princess kind of demeanor. And then Tatterhood was born. And I can't remember if she came out of her mother's womb riding a goat, but she definitely rode a goat through most of the rest of her life.
Oh, that rules.
And had a big wooden spoon that she used as a weapon, and was very protective of her sister. And there's a whole thing with like fighting goblins, and the trolls or goblins or whatever steal her sister's head, and she has to take her still alive sister and like go rescue her head and put it back on her body.
Oh my God. This is like begging for a comic adaptation. I've never heard of this.
Years and years ago, I drew my friend Kathy as Tatterhood riding a goat. And it was, I think, if anybody knows Kathy Johnson, I think she was an appropriate.
You're not wrong. That's really good.
But yeah, that kind of vibe of just like, man, the internal logic to this story is completely consistent, but boy, you tell it out loud to a group of people on Zoom and it is bonkers.
Oh man,
that was the title story to a book that I still have, that's just a collection of woman-centered folktales from around the world that I have read over and over and over again over my life. It's like, oh, these are wonderful.
I have a quick question for the whole panel. Did any of you have a book growing up that was like the weird folktale or mythology book? Specifically, I want to know if anyone else had that like Delari's Book of Greek Myths with the really great illustrations. Does anyone know what book I'm talking about?
I think I've heard of that book.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, I feel like this is like a very common thing I've talked with other cartoonists about. It's like beautiful pastel illustrations, and yeah, there's a lot of like books out there that kids like lock onto when they're kids and sticks with them the rest of their natural lives.
This is not an illustrated book, but this is one of my personal favorites that I read over and over. Which is the thing about this that is kind of unique and interesting. It's mostly ghost stories. It says fairy tales on it, but it's actually ghost stories. But this was compiled in the late 19th century by a guy who went to Ireland and just like found some people to tell him, like, tell me your ghost stories from, like, and he was specifically looking for people whose first language was Gaelic. So they're not traditional Irish, like it's not Finn McCool or anything like that. These are just like, well, my friend was out walking in the field and fought a ghost, you know, like you do. So they have a lot of character to them, but I it's not something I necessarily read as a kid, but it's something that I've read many times because it's got a kind of weird uniqueness to it that is not really replicated in other collections of Irish fairy tales and ghost stories that I'm aware of.
Just because of the nature of the thing.
Yeah, because of the way, like he transcribed it well enough that you can tell when a different person is telling a story. Different speakers have different speaking styles, and so the language is very rich and interesting because, again, these are native Gaelic speakers who are often kind of in real time translating what's going on in their minds into English. So some of the sentence constructions are very awkward and strange and entertaining because it's like Gaelic grammar mapped on to English.
I see.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other like beloved childhood books that stuck with you into adulthood?
My mom used to read me Goblin's Market as a baby. I feel like that explains a lot.
I've heard that one mentioned before with cartoonists as well.
Yeah, I was also, I think, deeply traumatized by the Salem Witch Museum as a child. That also.
Oh man, I think I've been there too.
I love going there.
It's very hokey as an adult, but as a kid,
it's terrifying. For me, it was it's this one story. It's part of a, like, I guess, series of horror books for kids, but it was like watercolor and it was beautiful. And there was one particular story I was fascinated with. It's the girl with the ribbon tie, I guess, around her neck. And yeah, like, I don't know. I just love that. I just don't remember who made it, unfortunately.
Is that a scary stories to tell in the dark story?
I think so. Yeah.
Like, because we're talking about like the really striking, like black and white kind of. Yeah, that guy's.
Yeah,
oh my God,
those are good too. Yeah.
Yeah.
They also made it into like a movie. Just
recently.
Yeah,
that's right. Well, the thing is, like, one quick sidebar before I go back to doing my job. But this is relevant because it involves another cartoonist. I know the director Guillermo del Toro is a huge fan of that artist's artwork, and I'm going to find his name right now. And he collected some of the originals, and when they came, there was a museum in town that collected his, like, a lot of his, like, curios from his second house that he has full of, like, nerd memorabilia. And they had originals of Stephen Gamble is his name, original artwork. And cartoonist friend Corey Bing came to visit me, and she got extremely verklempt seeing those originals. But they're incredible. Like, they're very, very influential on a lot of people I know.
Oh, absolutely. They're horrifying too, but like,
they're absolutely
just in your mind.
Yeah, there's one that's like I cannot look at. It's very bad, very frightening. Okay. Let's go back to my list of questions here. Isabella, you like exploring surreal and monstrous imagery in your work, and that extends to your autobio comics that you've done as well. You did a pair of comics called Burn Your Demons and Run With Your Demons, which are autobio, but can you talk about the way you chose to draw them that incorporated like frightening and surreal imagery?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a person who I kind of feel like I need to do autobio for like figuring out how I feel about things because I don't really intrinsically know how I feel about things. But I'm also super uncomfortable with autobio because I don't want everyone knowing my business. Yeah, right. We've been there. We're cartoonists. So my strategy for Burn Your Demons and Run With Your Demons, which is an ongoing series that I may make more of someday, was to try to, what do I say? Abstract it as much as possible. So the books kind of switch between what I call like real autobio moments that show like me out doing things, and this internal landscape. So everything in the book that takes place in this forest is essentially taking place like inside of my head. And in the inside of my head space, all these different aspects of me or my internal thoughts are personified by that mushroom that's up there right now, and birds, and in Run With Your Demons as a wolf. And I sort of know what everything is, but I hope that it maybe is a little bit harder to follow in the actual comic if you're reading it. Yeah, and I flip between them quite frequently so that the things that are happening in my life, you can sort of see how I'm reacting to them in my head in this abstract sort of way. So I like doing that because I get to draw more interesting things than just me talking to my friends, and also because I get to sort of abstract the things that are going on and feel a little less like I'm
Vulnerable.
yeah, and also just I get uncomfortable where my stories intersect with other people's stories, telling it for them. And sometimes I don't want to ask a person if I can include them in an autobio story, so I just turn them into a bird or something.
That makes sense, and that's a really interesting take on autobio that I think is relatable for a lot of people who work in autobio or attempt autobio. That's really interesting.
I also like kind of
yeah.
cutting things down to their most universal core part. So I hope that readers will identify with it more the less specific details it has to me.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Kat, another anthology piece of yours that I was really struck by when I was researching for the panel, and I think I guess deserves mention in a goth panel because it's about like death ceremony and like that kind of social, like that's a social institution, I guess you can call it. Can you tell us about the reusable coffin?
Yeah, I collaborated with producer and writer Rose Eveleth, and we worked on this one story based off of a recent discovery by an Egyptologist that kind of challenged our general knowledge and conception of just like ancient Egypt, like coffins. So apparently, through her discoveries, she found that through economical, like financial hardships in ancient Egypt, they used to, which was a common practice apparently, reuse like coffins. So what would he do is basically break into a tomb, take out the coffin, take out the mummy inside of it, like put it to the side, and then just take the coffin back home and would just like reface it, and would put a new mummy inside of it. And it was interesting because it never I never thought that was like even a possibility. But I think about 40% of the coffins that they analyzed were all reused, and that was without using any like advanced technology to look through the plaster and look deep down. So there's even instances where they would have a name on the coffin, but it would be like crossed out, and then just like someone graffitied their own name on it. Not graffitied, but like wrote it on top of it.
No
So
one
it's
will
very
ever
DIY.
know.
Yeah. And it was for coffins. It was even for like the funeral like objects as well. I forgot what to call it. The canopic
Jars, yeah.
jars. Yes. So yeah, it's very interesting, and I don't know. It's they even what I thought was even more fascinating is that they would reface it, and they would base off the style off of like the fashion trend at the time. So I don't know if I have any images up there, but let's say for like a certain dynasty, they would just have like a white dress on the coffin, And then the next one, they would have like, the arm across the coffin or something, and everything had like it was very symbolic. And so it was just interesting, and it just goes to show that there's just these people were so desperate to show respect for their dead, and cared about their family members so much to like ensure them like a great afterlife, that they would do stuff like this. And I don't know, it kind of made me appreciate like death ceremonies that we would have nowadays, and just like different types. And it's not for us to judge how people celebrate it, but there's yeah, it was a very interesting story. I really liked working on that one.
Yeah, I was really curious on how what you approach in terms of like what tone you were going for, because I know Rose's work. She likes science-based comics and things based on true facts, and but still making them like engaging and interesting, and like choosing subjects that draw people to them, but still like it's like, can you talk about like the tone that you guys wanted to achieve in terms of telling that kind of story, and like the premise of like using coffins over and over again?
Right. Well, I mean, it was a topic about death, so we wanted to end it like lightheartedly, because death is just a morbid concept in general, and so we wanted someone to kind of walk away from the story not feeling so like depressed afterwards, but just like appreciate life, and also appreciate like the afterlife as well.
Gotcha.
Because that's kind of tricky to to do that, unless it's like dark humor, but like we didn't want to do that exactly.
Yeah. Jessi, I want to talk with you about another project you've done and completed, right? It's completed, Gnome,
Yes.
which has an extremely specific aesthetic that I'm really into, which is adorable characters exploring beautiful natural scenes, but there's this like ever-present existential dread. And you had a really great phrase to describe it to me, which is a cartoonish body horror. Can you like talk about what you were going for there?
Yes. So Gnome, which you can actually read all of it online at gnomecomic.tumblr.com. It's in reverse order, so go to the beginning. But the short pitch for it was, what if plants were people? And the long pitch is getting into that. The cartoonish body horror is, I love plants. I just before this panel, I was at my vegetable garden. I've got a ton of house plants, but I'm also very interested in and fascinated by the weirder / darker parts of plants. Stuff like how certain kinds of trees like communicate with each other using chemical signals, and can like tell each other when there's like, I'm being attacked by a parasite, or there's a fire, and make more of this chemical, so maybe the tree 25 feet away will have a better chance or whatever. Or how there's certain kinds of forests that actually it's not a forest, it's one single organism that's sprouted up hundreds of individual trees, or just like mushrooms as a concept.
Yeah, just as a concept.
Yeah, it's just like, even like I do a lot of houseplant propagation, and like that feels very cute and wholesome, but it's like you're chopping up the body of a plant to make more plant, and the plant's just kind of like, yeah, I mean, that's fine. And like that that very casual approach to life and death and individuality and continuation of yourself in another thing was what I was trying to explore with Gnome. Just like, how many different ways can I take this little thing, this little character that was running around this forest, and make something weird happen to them.
The way you describe it, it makes me think of, have you ever read Ant Colony by Michael DeForge?
I have read, I think, most of it when he was had it on Tumblr. I was following around with it.
I feel like the tone isn't exactly the same, but it kind of seemed like you and he were going for a similar what if scenario, just kind of like applying these, you know, to plants or insects, for example, perfectly natural phenomena, but by applying it to more humanoid or anthropomorphized things, making them almost grotesque in a way that is very interesting to me. I what I find is cool is you go for very different tones and succeed, but I like that what if scenario kind of similar, at least to me as a reader.
Yeah, like I can see how he's more taking something that like maybe we overlook or don't like to think about, and like pushing the grotesque into your face. And I'm going, here's this grotesque thing, I'm going to make it palatable because that's interesting to me.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. Dylan, yeah, here we go. I've got another question for you. Another topic I wanted to bring up with you that relates to the Gothic theme of the panel are Goths, specifically characters who identify as Goths. Specifically when they appear in stories that don't have a Goth aesthetic like hanging over the entire narrative. It's just a Goth living in, say, like in your comic Valley of the Silk Sky is science fiction that has a Goth in it. You describe them as elder Goth, which is great. Can you talk about this character?
This is one of those situations where, like, when you script, I don't know, this is what I do anyway. I script a comic. Sometimes I have spaces for characters, but I don't know who that character is yet, but I know what their function is in the story. So I'll just kind of write filler dialogue for them while I'm figuring it out. And when it came time to actually draw this chapter, I was like, well, who is this person? Like, I know what you're supposed to be doing here, but I don't really know who you are. So let's figure that out, because that's probably going to change some things about how you're presented and how the thing is even written. And so one of the things this is very self-indulgent, but the entire comic is very self-indulgent, but it's just like, I just feel like drawing kind of like an older Goth character. So like, how can I retrofit that into what I have already created? And the way, like, I think a lot about, for the comic, like how resources work in general. So what does it mean to be wearing eyeliner and lipstick in a comic, where it's not like you go to, a store and buy those things? Like, how do you acquire those materials? How do they work? How do they operate? And so part of what's interesting to me about deciding what I want a character to look like and then seeing if I can retrofit that into what world already exists in the comic is like, it can be kind of a stimulating exercise of like, this is kind of what I want this person to look like, and now I have to figure out how that makes sense. But I don't even have to explain that to the reader. I just need it to work for myself. Mm-hmm. And part of what was interesting to me about having that particular character design was, first of all, it gives me things to draw that I enjoy drawing, which is like fun, colorful hair and, heavy eye makeup and like dark lipstick and all this kind of stuff. Like, and, I don't anymore because I'm old, but I used to go clubbing a lot. And, like Goth music and the Goth scene as that, when we're talking about Goths, often we're talking about people who are like the club scene, but, like the aesthetic has been around for a very long time. But, like when I was out clubbing, there were always people who were older, like in their 40s and 50s and 60s, who were there at the club because Goth music as a scene had kind of originated in the 70s. So there were always elder Goths as a part of the community. And I also think about how older people are represented in comics, especially given that our current cycle of a lot of well-known cartoonists are often very young, 20s and 30s. And so it's like, what does it mean to inject an older person into a comic you know, as I get older and I'm like, it hurts to go dancing all night now. And now we don't do it anyway. It's the pandemic. You know, it's like, I'm tired now. I want to go to bed early. So thinking about a lot of those kinds of things, like how does the aesthetic work, and how does having an older person in basically an adventure style of comic of like we're running around and fighting monsters and doing all this kind of stuff, like what happens when you have bad knees, and that is what you were trying to do. Yeah. So elder goth means a specific thing within a goth community, but having that imagery injected into a comic that doesn't have a goth scene per se, it's just, you know, it's like how do I put that, again, like it's a self-indulgent thing, how do I put this into a comic and make it work?
Well, and it's kind of interesting. So I work primarily in science fiction, and this is something I think about frequently when I consume sci-fi media is, you know, when you have like a bunch of humans that are hanging out, and in the case of Valley of the Silk Sky, like a planet of like alien bee people, like what are the cultural artifacts for humanity? Right. And so it's always fun when it's like, you know, baseball or, you know, Vivaldi or root beer. I really love the idea of it being like 9 Inch Nails or like scene like clothes. Like that is a very fun idea to me that I don't know if is explored quite nearly enough.
Right. Or even just like when you're like specifically for like, also this character here is very goth inspired, but this is one of the bee people you were just talking about of like, again, self-indulgent, like how do I get to draw a creature who is effectively wearing heavy makeup all the time, except it's not makeup, it's just how their skin looks. Like they normally have these patterns on their skin, but it lets me kind of bring a goth aesthetic into this comic that does not have the same, you know, path of history that our world does. So
they're so goth, their makeup never comes off.
Exactly, precisely. That's why it's not running when you get sweaty. That was also like, again, like how, okay, if I want to have this elder goth character, but I don't want their makeup to be running everywhere, how does makeup then work in a way that allows them to be running around having beautiful makeup in a situation where it's like, oh no, I'm sweating all over the place. So like, what kind of materials and resources can I plan into the world to make that a thing, you know?
Gotcha. Oh, that's a really fun idea. I want to like think about just goths running around alien planets now.
Right.
I have a couple more questions we can do, but I wanted to check with Jaromir first on time. How are we doing? What do we have left? Oh, you're muted still.
We probably got about 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay.
To wrap up, and when we're done, I just have a couple of things to plug for folks.
Cool. All right, then I can cover these last 2 questions then. I wanted to talk over a few more projects that I found that are not necessarily comics, but they still seem very germane to what we're covering. So Isabella, tell me about this tarot project that you've been working on.
Oh yeah, so I drew a tarot deck. I was trying to teach myself tarot, and the way I learn is like the book project way, where you like read about something and then make a project about it. So I was like, cool, I'll read about it and draw cards casually. And then I do nothing casually. So it became a fully illustrated 78 card tarot deck with a Kickstarter, and is now in its like 3rd printing, is coming to me now. But the basic premise behind the cards, once I stopped just like messing around and actually like made myself some rules, is that it's based off of Rider-Waite-Smith, which is a traditional tarot deck that most people think of when they think of tarot decks. And I tried to stay pretty true to that symbolism while updating all of the characters and situations to be modern day. So yeah, I was really just trying to make a workable tarot deck that was easy to read with, that looked like my world. And it's been kind of magical, actually, because a lot of people have written to me and been like, oh, this looks like my world and me and my friends, which is great because I was drawing me and my friends and worlds are shared. So that worked out pretty well. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do, actually. It's one of the few projects I've done that I like enjoyed the whole time.
What's the appeal of tarot for you personally?
Mm, well, I actually like doing readings for myself, and for other people. I think of each card. If you read about tarot more, this might make more sense. But I think of each card as essentially like a little bit of good advice, or like a little scene that shows something that's a pretty universal thing. And the magic for me of tarot is that when you like pull the card, which is a universal thing, and then you think to yourself of a specific thing in your life, that's like the magic in my mind, which is also sort of the same way I think about comics. So, for an example, the card you were just showing, the Fool, is about sort of going on a little adventure and foolishly trusting the world to catch you if you fall. Um, which is I love that concept. But so if I were to pull this card for someone doing a reading and I would be like, "Yes, the Fool, this is what it means." And they would like, "Oh yeah, I should totally do that road trip." That's
Hmm.
the part that's magical to me.
Gotcha. So it's like it helps you drive prompts that you can like take into different like organic directions. That's cool.
Yeah, it's a lens.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a good word for it. It's a lens.
Yeah.
Cool. Dylan, you also have a project that is like adjacent to comics, but I think would be really fun to people watching this panel. Can you talk about what Feeping Creatures is and what you do for it?
So Peeping Creatures is just the name of kind of my monster artwork. And I've been drawing monsters since I was a tiny child, but this particular like branding of them into a thing, I've been doing for over 15 years now. And so comics are very labor intensive. You've got your scripting and you've got your thumbnailing and penciling and inking and coloring and assembling into a book and all this kind of stuff. And sometimes I just want to draw something and not think about it too much. So the Feeping Creatures are about like very quick, more id-based artwork that are like, actually, if you can put my camera back on, I can show you some of these things.
Those are cute.
Like I make these little sculptures like this, or these are little tiny paintings that I did that they're just sort of like, try to do this as quickly as possible so that I'm not obsessing about it too much. And then some of it comes into more formal form. Like this bat started out as just a quick sketch, but then I got it made into an enamel pin because bats are awesome and I love them. And there aren't enough bat pins. And like these rat socks.
Oh, those rule.
Those are so
were
good.
a thing where it's like I had done the pixel rat art in high school and posted it on Facebook, and people were like, "That's amazing! You should totally get those made into fabric or like into."
Oh, Dylan has gotten so excited about rats that it broke his computer.
Socks are too powerful.
No.
Come back.
Well, let's give him a couple seconds, see if it hops back on. While we wait for him to finish the rat story, I guess I can open the floor. Is there anything else that either of you, Kat, Isabella, or Jessi, want to talk about more, or anything that came up in the conversation that you want to circle back to?
I can do a self-indulgent plug. I've got my book, Witchlight, which is out this year from Random House Graphic, which is in the title, but it's not very spooky. More likely to cry reading it than get scared, but it's still good.
It's very good. I really liked it when I read it.
I just read it and it's fantastic.
Oh, beautiful.
I'm very proud of it. Thank you.
You should be.
Yeah, we can go into plugs. Kat, is there anything you want to plug?
I guess just my website. I'm in the process of making actually like a webcomic, like a spooky, like horror anthology webcomic, but it's still in the works. But you can probably see like updates for it on my website or even on Instagram at Cat F Comics with the X at the end.
Does it have a title yet?
Not yet. Not
Okay.
yet. Yeah.
But it's coming up.
Yeah, and it's based off of like just like Central American like folklore.
Ooh.
So
so
that's like I'm
cool.
really excited for that. That's like my side project as I'm working on like big projects, but it's like a nice like a breather.
You need that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Isabella, do you have anything you want to plug?
Sure. My next thing isn't spooky at all. It's one of my sex ed comics coming out with Oni Press, A Quick and Easy Guide to Consent. So hopefully not scary.
And I guess I can try and give Dylan a plug since he tragically
he's
died.
back.
Oh, is he back?
I think I'm back. Sorry, my internet decided right then would be an excellent time to crap out because why not?
It was,
But I was
very
basically-
funny.
Anyway, Feeping Creatures, random stuff that I do that is monster themed and Halloween themed and that entertains me. To me.
Awesome.
So,
do you have anything else that you want to plug that you're working on right now?
so the comic we were talking about just a minute ago, Valley of the Silk Sky, is my current project. I am publishing it online at valleyofthesilksky.com, and I was going to try to finish it this year, and then our world collapsed into chaos, so it hasn't really worked out that way. But that's the main project I'm working on right now, and then studioender.com is my main website with all of my comics of various sorts on there, including all the stuff I was talking about before, with like the queer and trans stuff, dealing with like nonfiction issues and that sort of thing. And I have a lot of autobio comics on there as well, and like horrible pun comics that have nothing to do with them.
Awesome. As for me, my name is Blue Delliquanti. I have done a handful of scary things. I did a scary comic for Iron Circus for The Sleep of Reason a couple of years ago. The big thing I'm plugging right now is my webcomic, Oh Human Star, that I did for 8 years and literally just finished. So I'm going to toot my own horn on that for a little bit longer.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks very much. But yeah, I think that's everything from us. Yarmir, anything you want to cover before we finish the panel?
Yeah, just a couple of things. First off, just thank you so much. That was great. Y'all are awesome. That was a really wonderful panel. A couple of things that I just want to plug real quick for our viewers at home and in the future. You all are in our future. One is you can purchase a variety of the books and products that were just plugged. cartooncrossroadscolumbus.org/exhibitors. You'll find the links there. And also, quite a few of our panelists are going to be on Discord after this if you want to chat with folks there about spooky stuff or otherwise. But beyond that, I think we're just about done.
Thanks very much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.